This is PD World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali, and you are watching Fault Lines. The diplomatic relationship between Pakistan and United States has always been on a roller coaster's ride. This week, United States Department Counselor Derek Chollet was on a visit to Pakistan. The bilateral discussion between the two sides discussed and touched upon many areas of cooperation, including economic cooperation and climate change. But the larger picture of US and Pakistan relationship has not been on an upward trajectory. And therefore, we have decided to invite some of the experts who can talk at length about this subject. Team Fault Lines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
The decades long relationship between Pakistan and the United States has been in flux following the American military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Geopolitical concerns that shaped America's regional alignments and priorities also defined relations with Pakistan. Since geopolitical and geoeconomic dynamics are shifting fundamentally, both sides are emphasizing positive transformations in ties. Pakistan and the United States began their defense talks in Washington to enhance coordination on strategic issues and explore various options for ramping up bilateral military and security ties. The 4-day talks ending on February the 16th is a second round of Pakistan-US mid-level defense dialogue. The first round was held in Pakistan in January 2021. US State Department Counselor Derek Chollet will lead a delegation to Pakistan this week. Economic ties and cooperation to tackle the impact of climate change would be on the agenda in the meeting between United States and Pakistani officials. The talks are being held in the backdrop of increasing militant activities in Pakistan by insurgents coming from Afghanistan. The US and Pakistan have a shared interest in fighting terrorists, and Washington has been assuring Pakistan its full support to counter terrorism. Pakistan and the United States are also holding trade and investment framework agreement talks in Washington in the last week of February and counterterrorism dialogue next month.
Ladies and gentlemen, my first guest in this part of my program is Ambassador retired Abdul Basit, who is an expert of US Pakistan relationship and requires no further introduction. Ambassador Saab, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Ambassador Saab, first things first. So, United States diplomatic relationship with Pakistan has been changing over time. How do you see this change of relationship between the two sides?
Thank you very much once again. And let me begin by saying that at least in Pakistan, no sane person would ever demur to putting Pakistan in a relationship on a predictable, positive trajectory. A trajectory which is broad based and a relationship which is mutually beneficial. Having said that, I strongly feel that Pakistan at least needs to be uh, moving in that direction, or if we are making, I mean, we should be making serious efforts towards augmenting, strengthening our relations with the U.S. It's given that U.S. is a superpower, and there are many things which Pakistan and US can do together. So there is no doubt in my mind that Pakistan should be working overtime to be having a good relationship with the US. But at the same time, we need to proceed in this regard with utmost circumspection, as well as with some dignity. Why I'm saying this, primarily for four reasons, I would say. First of all, uh, there is a limit to Pakistan-US relations. Though we would like it to be a broad-based relationship, we all know that how is our region is kind of evolving, uh, how China-US relations are, what is the situation in Afghanistan. So I would like our government to be very, very careful, because when we have this relationship, or when we are moving towards enhancing our relationship with the US, first, it should not be at the cost of our strategic partnership with China. Second, the most important thing is that our relations with the US should not be creating more chasms between Islamabad and Kabul. Thirdly, I would say that it should also help us in different ways to, uh, move towards resolving the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, which is, as you know, the sine qua non of hostility between Pakistan and India. And last but not the least, this relationship should be, as I said earlier, a broad-based relationship which should help Pakistan improve its economy. We should have more and more US investment. There should be more and more trade between the two countries, and then we have a 1 million strong diaspora in the US, and they can play a kind of living bridge between the two countries. So there are many facets to this relationship, and keeping in view the three things which I have mentioned, because there are many things like US, India, we all know they're strategic partners, and their relations do impinge on our basic national interests. So we need to remind the US that if they want to be a factor of stability in South Asia, then first they will have to. I'm not saying to rehyphenate Pakistan, India, and relate. Pakistan, India when it comes to U.S. Relations in the region, but it is important to keep reminding the U.S. side that. Unless India resolves the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, there is simply no possibility for viable peace in South Asia. So these are fundamentals which I thought to touch upon before you ask the next question.
But Basit Saab, don't you think that United States interest from this region has shifted out ever since US military has completely withdrawn from Afghanistan? Do you believe that United States has an active interest in this region?
Obviously, Afghanistan, when they were present here, things were different. But still, I would say that it is not only about Afghanistan. I'm sure you must have seen the national security strategy, which was published in October last year, the U.S. strategic strategy. So, national policy, their strategic policy. So they consider China as their long-term. I would not say enemy or adversary, but they see that the long-term competition is with China. And they would like Pakistan not to really continue moving towards building a strong partnership with China. Hence, their opposition to CPAC. They keep on reminding us even publicly that Pakistan should be careful, and because it's a debt trap for Pakistan. So, and then they would also like Pakistan and India to have a normal relationship so that they both can, if Pakistan at least shouldn't be creating problems for India according to their perception. So it is not only about Afghanistan or terrorism, though those are important issues. And terrorism is one issue. That's why I would like this relationship to move beyond these negative factors, terrorism and non-proliferation and so on and so forth. We should be focusing more, and then one should be. We must remember that Pakistan, US can never have a strategic partnership. We will always have a transactional relationship, but we need to manage this relationship so that it doesn't. There shouldn't be any negativity that unnecessarily uh, impact on our.
If I heard you correctly, or if I understood you correctly, you believe that terrorism is one of the areas of concerns for the United States. Do you actually believe this to be true, despite the fact that US has left the people of Afghanistan completely uncovered after not only militarily getting out of Afghanistan, but also abandoning the country financially, which is causing further crisis and giving more room to the terrorists?
No, I've always been saying, and I have been all along, I have been of the view that the US might have withdrawn from Afghanistan, but they would never leave this region. This region is too important for them because of China, because of India. and because of Central Asia. So I don't think that India, US has lost interest in this region. Afghanistan is a problematic country. There is no doubt about that. And hence my submission that while at present we are having a dialogue with defense and security dialogue with the US in Washington D.C., that is a second round underway. And I'm anxiously looking forward to see as to what kind of a press release is issued tomorrow, or what kind of a statement comes. Because, my own feeling is that we should not be doing anything which further complicates our relations with Kabul, because Kabul is too important for us, no matter who is in charge there. Now the Taliban are effectively running their government. They do have economic issues, but for us, it is important. And throughout, the last 40 or so decades, we have worked with any government, whosoever formed the government in Kabul, we have worked with them, whether it is Najib or it is Nur Tarakai or anyone. So, and now, even in the 90s, we had kind of, we had worked with the Taliban, the then Taliban government as well. So for Pakistan, it is important that the US understands our interests as well, while we are ready and very much willing to work with them, coordinate whatever is required to be done in this behalf against terrorism, because terrorism is no one's interest, is in no one's interest, and we need to deal with this scourge and extirpate it as as effectively as possible. But I hope that things would be taken in that spirit in Washington, D.C., and they should be cognizant of our interests. And, as I said, especially when they are dealing with India, they should be mindful of our interests as to how their relations are in different ways affecting our security.
Basit Saab, United States has been a partner of India in this region in many areas of strategic cooperation. But many critics believe India will not be a long-lasting, a trustworthy, and a dependable partner for United States. What are your point of view, or what are your feelings about it?
While India is a member of the Quad, as you know, it's an alliance of 4 countries, including Japan, Australia, US, and India. And India is in a very interesting situation right now. It has the wherewithal to play both sides, and it can do it without any harm to its relations either with the US or with Russia, or for that matter, China. Though we have seen skirmishes on the line of along the line of actual control, but still India is well positioned to exploit its present, economic clout, it's an increasing clout in the world, to its advantage. So I think India understands the importance of its relations with the US if it were to develop, quickly and catch up with China. And hence, as I look at it, India, US will continue to strengthen their relations. Just recently, today or yesterday, India agreed to buy 200 Boeing aircraft from the US. And President Biden issued a statement appreciating the Indian decision. So I think India-US relations are going to move from strength to strength in the foreseeable future, because US does see India as a counterpoise to China, both in our part of the world and more important in Asia Pacific. And it's an important partner. US would continue to mollycoddle in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdul Basit Sahab, for being guest in our program.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am now joined by another expert. Her name is Afira Firdaus, who is an independent analyst and joining me from Islamabad on Skype. Afira, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shabad. Thank you for having me.
Afira, you heard Ambassador retired Abdul Basit Sahab and his point of view. In your learned opinion, what could be the key areas of cooperation between two sides? I mean, United States and Pakistan.
So, as we know, Pakistan and US has a history of 75 years of bilateral relations. So, Pakistan and US are already cooperating in number of areas such as trade, energy, health, defense, and counterterrorism. But there are some other areas of mutual interest to explore, such as IT and tech sector, startup sector, and climate change, education, and research. So if we talk about IT and startup sector in Pakistan, it witnessed an unprecedented growth in past few years, especially during COVID-19. In fact, despite the recent hiccups in economy, there has been a robust growth of IT and IT-enabled remittances in past 5 years. According to Economic Survey of Pakistan 2020 to 2021, the compound annual growth rate of IT and related services reached 18.85%, which is highest growth rate of any industry in the region. Additionally, Pakistan's information technology services sector has emerged as the largest net services exporter in the country, with IT exports more than doubling from 2019 to 2022. If I quote the number, which is $2.62 billion in 2022. And according to Invest to Innovate, in 2021, 83 startups raised $350 million in Pakistan. So Pakistan is fast emerging as one of the IT hubs in the world, and this is all thanks to its human resource potential. So IT and startup is one of the key areas to explore in bilateral relations between Pakistan and the United States.
And also, Afira, also Ambassador Basit Saab said that there needs to be a balance in the diplomatic relationship with China and with United States. How plausible do you think is this maintaining of a balance between the two sides, particularly when Pakistan's inclination towards China has phenomenally increased during last about 10 years?
I'd like to start by mentioning that it is very sad to see where bilateral relations between Pakistan and United States are right now. Pakistan was the country which facilitated United States and China to resume bilateral relations in 1971. In result, both countries, US and China, re-established their diplomatic relations and also signed a bilateral trade agreement in 1979. So today we hear that US has no interest in the region, specifically in Pakistan or Afghanistan. So coming towards the balancing point, Pakistan's national security policy document states that Pakistan does not subscribe to camp politics. Relevant government quarters have insisted that Pakistan wants excellent relations with both US and China and can serve as bridge as it did in Cold War. So how with the economic and security challenges, Pakistan can play that role again. As far as China is concerned, Pakistan is a strategic partner with China, where China has done huge investments in terms of CPAC projects. Whereas regarding the US, I believe the role of US in the region is not over. Pakistan needs to build strong case that the situation in Afghanistan is not in anyone's favor, and no one in the Washington for sure would want to come back for another episode of counter-terrorism venture in this region.
And Afira, exactly how do you believe this counter-terrorism cooperation can increase between the two sides? Do you actually believe there is a real target in front of the two sides where the two sides can synergize their efforts Because apparently United States interests are far more different than that of Pakistan.
As I already mentioned before, that terrorist threat in this region is in no one's favor. Either it is Pakistan or US or Afghanistan itself. So Pakistan and US continues to consider it in their mutual interest to work on counterterrorism, and this it has been reiterated so many times in the recent past. If we talk about the recent phone call between General Asim Munir and U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, they discussed mutual interest related to defense issues, but they also discussed the counterterrorism cooperation. So if I go back to January 2023 visit of U.S. Central Command Chief General Michael Kurilla, and he discussed the same issue with current Army Chief General Asim Munir. On diplomatic front, Pakistan and the United States continues to pressurize the Afghan Taliban to meet their commitments not to support and shelter terrorist groups on Afghan soil. Moreover, there are some other things that State Department's integrated report on countries stated that US can play role to improve the capacity building of paramilitary forces and law enforcement agencies in Pakistan, primarily through trainings on counterterrorism tactics and provisions of equipment, because these forces are the first responders during terrorist attacks.
Thank you very much, Afira, for being guest in our program.
Thank you, Shabad.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, we have often seen children fighting over balloons, but this time there are two superpowers that went into a conflict, that went into a heated diplomatic argument over a balloon that, according to the Chinese, was just collecting data about weather, and the United States made it a diplomatic issue. They said this was a spying balloon that entered US's airspace, and US had a right to shoot it down. Not only the United States shot it down, but also this event was covered live on television, and there was a deliberate effort to create some embarrassment for Chinese. Chinese side responded to the allegations and said that at least 10 such incidences have already taken place, but China has never tried to create a havoc out of it. Team Fault Lines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to this part of my program.
A diplomatic rift between China and the US surfaced when a surveillance equipment was spotted over the continental US, visibly hovering over a state with key military assets. China has said the balloon spotted over the state of Montana is merely a civilian airship which deviated from its planned route, but the US suspects it's a high-altitude surveillance device. The Chinese balloon, which Beijing denies was a spy vessel, spent a week flying over the US and Canada before President Joe Biden ordered it shot on the 4th of February. The US military has since carried out 3 more shoot-downs as it combs the skies for objects that were not being captured by a radar. Whatever the capabilities of this particular balloon, the US has taken the threat seriously enough to postpone Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to China, which was due to take place on 5th and the 6th of February. Washington has imposed sanctions on 6 Chinese entities it says are tied to the balloon, an action which drew criticism from Beijing. China's claim that the US has flown balloons into its airspace marks the latest escalation in balloon saga that has gripped the world. The result of the incident is a major blow for US-China diplomacy, and the diplomatic fallout from the incident will have serious, lasting consequences.
Ladies and gentlemen, my guest in this part of program is Dr. Carl Carlton Thaler. He is a professor in University of Akron. Dr. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Carl, the two sides went into a heated argument about this balloon that was collecting some data. And the Chinese are quite confident that there was no reason for the United States to be so furious about it. How do you see these developments?
So it certainly has been made a big issue by politicians. That there's no question about that. This became a very politicized issue as soon as it was announced in the media that the balloon was over Montana. This was considered particularly sensitive because the United States has missile silos in Montana. So the idea was that the Chinese were spying on those silos and that this was not at all acceptable. So there were calls, particularly from Republican politicians, to shoot the balloon down immediately. This put President Biden in a bit of a bind in that shooting down the balloon would be considered clearly a provocative act from the Chinese perspective. But having said that, because the balloon flew at below space levels, and so this is actually important, was flying below space in U.S. airspace directly over the continental United States, it was considered within the right of the United States to shoot the balloon down, because flying the balloon over the United States, particularly with spy apparatus attached to it, is considered essentially a hostile act. If it had been above space, say a satellite, that would not have happened. So satellites are not shot down, even though they cross the continental United States all the time and cross other countries all the time. So another reason why the balloon was shot down was because the United States intelligence community wanted access to the sensors and various other electronic material on that balloon to gauge how much the Chinese can actually gather intelligence, collect intelligence on us. And so there's really essentially three reasons: the political reason, the national security reason, and then the intelligence reason for shooting down the balloon.
But Dr. Kaul, we are not certain if this balloon was actually on a spying mission. A superpower as advanced as China, why would they be collecting spying information, intelligence information through these small balloons that are visible from the naked eye?
Well, the U.S. intelligence community has come out and said that indeed there was proof that this balloon was spying on the United States. The actual electronics have been collected. They are being assessed right now, and they've been determined to be electronics that are used for intelligence collection. And one of the things that was leaked into the press in the United States was that the U.S. intelligence community was collecting intelligence on the balloon as the balloon traversed the United States. So at least from the American perspective, and I highly doubt our intelligence community is lying about this, because this would come back to burn them pretty significantly if it was found that this was not a so-called spy balloon. They are very convinced that this indeed was a balloon that was used for various types of spying. So actually the balloon could collect multiple different types of intelligence at once: signals intelligence, sensor intelligence of our activities on the ground, and also taking pictures.
Dr. Kaul, when we hear this argument from United States, it gets very difficult to digest, particularly if you see this in light of the revelations made by Edward Snowden. And according to him, not only United States was spying on many nations, but also the entire infrastructure of telecommunication, internet, computers, and even the smartphones have been used globally for this reason. And it looks extremely absurd when United States demonstrates that only United States has a monopoly on such events. How do you say? Yeah, दोबारा करता हूँ, question लंबा हो गया. Dr. Kaul, it reminds me of the revelations made by Edward Snowden. His disclosures had revealed numerous global surveillance programs being run by United States intelligence agencies. And then the United States can look into the eyes of other nation and can tell them that you cannot be doing such surveillance of US. Aren't we living in a world of double standards?
Well, one of the things that we need to make very clear is that countries spy on each other all the time. And no one says that that doesn't happen. Of course it does. The United States spies on China. The United States spies on many different countries, uh, including countries that aren't our adversaries. There's some degree of intelligence collection that goes on. Uh, of course that happens. Any country that doesn't have intelligence collection capabilities and programs in place is putting their national security at risk. So I don't think anybody's saying spying is in itself illegal activity that a country shouldn't be engaged in, should be punished for, that kind of thing. It's the nature of the spying that here that's really the key variable, and that is that if you fly an aircraft, be it a balloon, an airplane, something like that, into a country's airspace and have that be a purposive act, then it's within the rights of that country to take that aircraft down. So if the United States, for example, flew a spy plane over China into their airspace and the Chinese shot it down, while there may be people in the United States who would get upset about that and complain, I think most people in the United States government would say, well, that was within the Chinese rights to take that plane down. You simply can't enter other countries' airspace in a way that is not pre-planned or is not accepted by that other country. It's a hostile act. So it wouldn't be surprising if we have aircraft in Chinese airspace that they would do the exact same thing.
But China has said more than 10 balloons have entered its airspace, which China did not take any action against. How would you comment on that?
Well, it would be interesting to see if the Chinese can actually offer proof that that's the case. One of the things that I can say is that the United States depends on balloons much less than the Chinese do. In fact, we don't depend on balloons very much at all for intelligence collection. And the reason for that is that the United States has a very sophisticated satellite program where we can collect the type of intelligence that we need from our satellites. The Chinese have a much less sophisticated satellite program, and so they depend much more on balloons, which are kind of a cheaper, easier way to collect intelligence. Yet the problem with using balloons is they fly below space. And if you're flying below space and you cross into someone else's airspace, then your platform, in this case a balloon, is at risk for being shot down.
But Dr. Karl, don't you think United States is more interested in creating hostility with China instead of engaging into a diplomatic dialogue?
Well, the short answer to that question is no. I don't think the Biden administration has any incentive to try to ramp up hostilities with China unnecessarily. Both the Chinese government and the present U.S. administration are trying to create an equilibrium in the relationship that reduces tensions. Both sides know that it's very important for two countries with the capabilities that China and the United States have to work a manageable relationship. Neither side wants conflict. Conflict would be immensely costly to both countries. It's not in their interests. Having said that, this has become a politicized issue, but with the opposition mostly. And what I mean by that is in the United States, you've got an opposition who is arguing that they're tougher on China than the present Democratic led administration in the United States. And so their main talking points is that Biden has been weak on this. Biden should have shot the balloon down when it was over the continental United States, despite really the risks to people on the ground for doing something like that. That's why this issue has been politicized. China has become a political issue in the United States where you've got some who are arguing for an extremely hawkish stance on China, whereas the administration right now is saying we need to have a manageable relationship with China and kind of cool the temperature down a bit because the dangers are very significant of conflict.
But Dr. Karl, do you see any serious desire by the United States to mend its relationship with China?
So, obviously these things depend on your perspective. If you're sitting in China or you're sitting in Pakistan, which is very close to China, you may think it looks like the United States is trying to pick a fight with China. And I can understand that perspective. But what I would say is the United States government views China as threatening for a couple of different reasons. Actually, there's more than a couple, but I'll focus on what I see as the biggest reasons. One reason is that the Chinese have engaged in provocative actions, particularly in the South China Sea, which seem to indicate that China is trying to make the South China Sea kind of its own personal water expanse. And that's not something the United States is willing to stomach because we have allies, we have trade that goes through that region. And so that's considered very provocative and destabilizing what the Chinese are doing. The second thing is the massive espionage program that China has to steal technological secrets from the United States. This is not only problematic from a military security standpoint because China has stolen so much of our military technological hardware secrets, but it's also problematic in that it allows China to outcompete some of our own firms because they've stolen our technology and can produce these things at a much cheaper rate because wages are so much lower in China. So these are reasons why, just like I said, just a couple that have caused a deterioration in the US-Chinese relationship. I'm sure from the Chinese perspective, they view that the United States is being unfair towards them, but from the American perspective, China is looked at as an actor that engages in threatening behavior towards American national interests.
And Dr. Karl, lastly, the trajectory of diplomatic relationship between the two sides. How do you see this going forward? Because at least in China, Xi Jinping not only is continuing, but has also emerged as a very strong leader who is very unlikely to reverse anything about his policies that have made him so popular so far.
So that's an extremely important question, probably the most important international relations question that all of us face today. And it's dependent on a few things, how the relationship moves forward. Part of it's dependent on domestic politics within China itself. So the key question there is how much does Xi Jinping depend on nationalism to try to maintain the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party? So in other words, if he depends on showing that China is a strong country that can stand up to, a strong country like the United States, potentially that could lead to some conflict. Not to say that China should bow down to the United States, not at all. But if there's an aggressive policy, particularly in Asia and the South China Sea, that will lead to friction with the United States, as I said. So if he feels confident in his leadership and doesn't need to use kind of nationalistic tactics to stay in the favor of the Chinese population, that will dampen the likelihood of conflict. On the American side, as I said earlier, if the China hawks get power in the United States again, say the next election, say, for example, Donald Trump becomes elected again, you're likely to see a much more hostile China policy, and one where he may try to appeal to his base by taking very hawkish stances towards China, very aggressive stances towards China. So both of these countries could have domestic politics play a role in their relationship with each other. The Biden administration does look at China as a near-term competitor. It's trying to manage the relationship. It's trying to a degree to depoliticize China policy, to not give in to people who are using this as a electioneering tactic. But he's under tremendous pressure. And the balloon incident didn't help. It's very difficult now in the United States to say, well, we should forget about the balloon incident and just move on. I know there are people that are hoping that'll happen, but this has become a very politicized issue. And, unfortunately, when it becomes politicized, not always the right decisions get made.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karl, for being guest in our program.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Dr. Carlson Teller, and now I am joined by an expert of political economy who's going to tell us about the weird art of economics that defines the relationship between two sides. My guest is Sultan Ali Haider. Sultan, welcome to the show.
Mahat, thank you for inviting me again.
Sultan, we are discussing this diplomatic saga between China and the United States. And for many critiques, this is more an economic problem. So, do you also believe in the theory that it's economy that is dictating all such controversies, and that is primarily a reason why the two countries have not been able to overcome their problems?
Things which is bringing US and China into confrontation has started in the early 2000s, or rather late 2000s, when China's economic growth started to grow disproportionately, and the trade deficit started to grow. So US felt that its global dominance is under threat. So that is at the heart of the problem. So there are different things that manifest, but US global dominance is seen under threat by US policy planners.
But Sultan, has United States anyway benefited out of these controversies or out of jeopardizing its relationship with China thus far?
If we talk about specifically the trade war that has taken place, so that is one manifestation of this problem. So US President Trump, he did that, ran on this election platform. And once he was in office in 2018, he started imposing trade tariffs on China. China retaliated. And this escalation went on for a few months. Then China started to stopped enacting tariffs in retaliation. After a while, then China started to de-escalate. Now, in the whole process, US and China did come at an agreement where China had to buy $200 billion of US goods to address the problem. Came in COVID, things couldn't happen. Long and short of it, in 2018, we had a trade deficit. In 2022, we have a highest trade deficit. So US has not really benefited. There would be sections of the economy that may have benefited, but overall US consumer has lost. In terms of China, yes, Chinese exporters would have lost. So there's no clear winner in this as far as China or the US is concerned. Both countries may have suffered.
You said none of the two sides have been a clear winner, but don't you believe China has had far more benefits in this war, in this economic war against the United States? Perhaps the only country that has been able to gain something out of an economic war with the United States.
China's exports would have been much larger had these tariffs not been there. As you see, the tariffs were in the range of 6 to 7%. Now the tariffs are at 25%. So these are very high. So what has happened is what is called is redirection of the imports. So import, rather than coming from China, they're coming from other Asian countries. So China has not benefited from it, right? Other Asian countries like Vietnam, like South Korea, Taiwan, other countries, they have benefited from it surely. So their exports have gone up, right? Other trading partners of US have surely benefited. So China has not benefited. US has suffered, yes, that too is the case.
And Sultan, how do you believe this affects the international geopolitics? Do you see any clear winners in this act of coercion?
You see, again, in terms of clear winners or losers, it's just both US and China. I would say broadly, we can say they have been the sufferers in this, and other countries have been winners. In terms of EU, you can say they have been sitting on the sidelines and keenly viewing this trade war. And they have been trying to adjust their own trading relationships, both with the US and China, so very dispassionately, right? So it's a very good test case for them. So I would say other countries may have benefited, but in terms of global economy and the direction that global trade has been going in terms of how we approach each other, so we have been at a loss. Because free trade is something where economy grows, people benefit.
Sultan, Xi Jinping is continuing to be one of the most powerful leaders of China. How do you believe this is going to affect the overall larger game that is taking place between these two superpowers?
Continuation of same policies, but when I say continuation of same policies, Chinese are very pragmatic, right? So, for example, uh, we saw de-escalation from China in this trade war. So Chinese, they did not act emotionally, right? So they knew the US has taken a very public and an emotional stance. So Chinese, they started de-escalating. And it was China that first started to lower the tariff without US lowering any tariff on Chinese goods. And then China agreed that it would buy $200 billion of US goods. Yes, COVID did come in between, but it's China that didn't let its ego come in between whatever was the pragmatic solution for the long-term growth. So in terms of Xi Jinping, what I think is same policy of whatever makes logical sense that will prevail, and whatever is the long-term interest of China. You see, one big difference between China and the US is in the political system. So US system is run on a 4-year election cycle, and every 2 years you have elections in the Congress. With Chinese, the decision making and people who are in charge, that is for a longer period. So they have a longer term interest, so they can take that view when designing their policies.
And for the United States, do you believe there is any reason to redefine its international policy with regards to China? Or do you believe this to be a continuation of the policy that US has towed so far?
I think also on the US side, there has been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate in the academia and in the financial space that purely going after these tariffs and hoping that manufacturing and jobs will return en masse to the US, it's not going to work. And it has to be led by competitive advantage. And you see, one aspect that we have not spoken about in this trade war, the other aspect was the technology part. And US was really concerned that Chinese government, due to its policies, it is forcing US companies to share its technology when they go into China. They have to get a local JV partner and then share the technology. So Huawei is one case which is very famous. So let's not go into that detail. But that was the other aspect. Now US is focusing more on innovation, and what I see, the more I read, US is realizing more, the policymaker and the industry in general, that they have to compete with China on innovation and productivity, which will allow US also to produce superior goods at a lower price.
Sultan, the United States is sinking fast under the burden of her own debt. Do you believe this is going to be another economic challenge that US is facing?
Right. So R&D innovation, so that is happening separately. The debt crisis, that is a financial sector. So that is another thing which can become a drag on the overall economy. So these are two different things. Yes, they're linked, but I think that in its own is not going to have an impact. You see, the focus, as long as the focus is a positive focus, US can be a winner. I think the negative aspect of some of the policies that US has followed is that it wanted to compete through its power and not through its competence, right? So the competitive advantage is usually in economic terms or in commercial terms, right? You should not be forcing somebody to buy your goods. You should have superior goods, so people should be queuing up to buy your goods. So therein lies the difference.
Thank you very much, Sultan Ali Haider, for being guest in our program today.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the two superpowers, China and United States, are either going to continue the environment of hostility or need to revisit this with a diplomatic and a softer dialogue that can perhaps solve their problems. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.